We're back with the Hubscale Podcast, where we dive into the minds of security leaders all around the world. This week we have Eric Foster, the CEO of Tenex.AI. Eric, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Tom. Really great to be here. I'm great.
Great. Glad to hear it. So to kick us off, Eric, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to being the CEO of Tenex.AI?
Absolutely. So, man, I've been fighting the good fight in cybersecurity for 30 years now. Started my career as a security professional, leveled up. It actually started my career as an entrepreneur first and foremost, but that very quickly in IT became into cybersecurity, and then leveled up through three different CISO positions, through several different startups. Long story short, I think have been trying to turn the tide of cybersecurity for a long time now, making progress as a defender and then trying to build products and then services to help other people defend themselves. One of the taglines that Google actually came up with when we partnered with them was giving good the advantage. And I feel like that's been a really good mission statement for me for my entire career, even before I knew it. We were really trying to turn the tide of cybercrime and give the good guys, the defenders, a better advantage, whether it was as a defender myself, as a product guy, or in building products or services for others.
Amazing. Fighting the good fight. I like it. So a little bit more about you then. So you mentioned it there. You're a three-time CISO. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is, do you see that as an advantage now that you're a startup vendor CEO?
Oh, absolutely. I think being empathetic, in general, understanding your customer, understanding your product, understanding your end user is exceptionally valuable. I've always believed in, in any great startup, I think you're building the products that you always wanted to buy, or you're building the product that solves your own personal need. I think that kind of alignment and that kind of empathetic alignment gives you a tremendous advantage, to be honest. Understanding the customer because you've been the customer, and understanding the problem because you're literally trying to solve your own problem. It's one of the mantras we use, that culture is really important to us at 10x, and we tie this in to say we're building the product that we always wanted to buy, the service company that we always wanted to deliver it, and we're doing it at the company we always wanted to work for. And I believe, if you take all those three things to heart, it gives you a real significant advantage, to be honest.
It's not a bad sell. I agree with you there. How does the CISO experience influence your decision making then? Do you notice it day to day, for example?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think if you notice the problem space more effectively, if you really understand cyber defense, if you understand what it's like to be a CISO at an organization, and so you understand the governance of buying new products is one easy example. I've worked at and with, tried to help other companies that really didn't understand what was in the CISO's head when they were buying a product, what was their desired outcome, but then they also didn't understand what the buying journey actually looked like as a CISO. Who are the kind of people you've got to get to build consensus from? What does your governance process look like? You can read about all of that stuff for sure. There's some people that have done some really great resources for understanding what's in the mind of a CISO if you've never been. But at the same time, having that lived experience is so valuable for almost everything in life, where if you've been through it before, you understand it so much better. And so, I think not only does it give you an edge on the defender side, understanding, it's like having been to battle before, you understand what it's like. Having been in the trenches in cybersecurity, you understand what the attackers generally are doing. You understand what modern cyber defense looks like. You understand And then, like I was saying, on the buying side, you understand what the governance process looks like. There's just so many advantages to me to doing that. And when whether I'm investing or trying to support other startups or trying to help great investors evaluate investments, several of the things that they look for, I think, are very common for a reason. They're typically looking for multi-time founders because you've learned a lot of lessons getting punched in the face with your previous startups. Those hard won knife fights in a telephone booth where you're coming away with a lot of scars. And then two, if you come from the buyer side, essentially, you have real world experience in whatever problem you're trying to solve, also gives you such an advantage. And I like looking for those kind of people when we hire people at 10x. I like looking for those kind of people in other startups we support, you name it. And I guess I say that especially, knowing your great content in Hubscale. It's about, in part encouraging other entrepreneurs to take the leap. And, I think there are a lot of great people that are, have that background. They've been in cybersecurity fighting the good fight, as an engineer or as an architect or as a leader. And they might have an entrepreneurial background, even if it was literally all the way back to running a paper route or something else when you were a kid. A lot of us have had that entrepreneurial spirit from very early on. And I would just encourage anybody who does. We need a lot more entrepreneurs in general, and we need a lot more people in the startup ecosystem than what we have today.
Absolutely. Having been on the buyer side does seem like a real advantage. How do you wield that? Do you go into conversations talking about that explicitly, or?
It's a good question. I mean, I think the best marketing, the best sales is honestly true and empathetic. I don't come in with some big prepared conversation to go, oh, let me explain how I understand your problems. It's just natural. It's just, I do understand your problems. I've been in your seat, and I'll say that a lot because it comes up very naturally in conversation. It's, I've been in your seat on the other side of the table, sir, and I understand this challenge. I understand what you're dealing with. And, coming at it from that perspective, just displaying that level of empathy, one of my maybe hard learned lessons in my personal life is that empathy is not a bad thing in almost every single way.
Yeah.
Understanding the other person's perspective, being able to put yourself in their shoes. And, I think that nobody likes to be sold to at the end of the day, right? But at the same time, people like working with people that they like, and they like working with people that understand them. And I think just doing that work ahead of time, even again, if you're listening to this and you don't come from a background where you think, well, I haven't been my buyer, I can't have that conversation with them. Empathy doesn't require you to actually have walked in their shoes. It just requires you to understand what it's like to walk in their shoes. And so you can put in the work to understand what they're going through, what their life looks like, what their business looks like, et cetera. Asking questions more than just coming in and giving a presentation, especially.
Sure.
It's a great approach to that.
Awesome. You've mentioned it already, but being a multi-time founder is obviously advantageous if you're an investor. I think this is your third or fourth time founding this time round. What will you do differently? Are there any specific lessons that you've learned that you're proactively trying to maybe avoid doing the same thing this time?
Oh man, Tom, it's definitely that hard fought experience from past startups has influenced me in a whole bunch of different ways. You learn from the good, you learn from the bad. Every company I've been at has taken lessons, taught me a lot of hard fought lessons. We could probably spend an entire podcast just talking about the lessons learned, even from the things not to do sometimes are just as valuable as understanding the wins. But one that is really, or a few that have really struck with me kind of from the beginning, it kind of goes back to a theme we were talking about earlier, which is I'm a big believer in when you understand the problem space, if you can come to market with a problem that you don't have to educate people about, that is already in their budget, that are, essentially already solves a problem that they're very, very aware of. So you don't have to go do a significant portion of education in the sales process, I believe is very, very valuable in evaluating a startup and evaluating a product and the success of a product. As you well know, as your listeners well know, the cybersecurity industry is insanely crowded, and there are quite frankly too many companies trying to build various solutions in cybersecurity in a lot of cases, and I say that on the heels of saying that we need more entrepreneurs, which we absolutely do. But what we don't need, for example, is, a 70th company coming in and saying that they do this one little weird niche thing in cybersecurity if they don't actually do it better or faster or cheaper.
Sure.
But, all that said, the advantage that and I learned this from Risk IQ, which, we had a really great run. We had a really great product and solution, but it was something where we very much had to educate the market.
Sure.
We basically invented the idea of attack surface management. We coined that term. We created that category that now is, a very robust, thriving category. But man, I remember back in the early days, Lou Manusos, Jason Zan, myself, spending a lot of time on the road in the office of CISOs explaining this whole concept to them, that they should consider their external attack surface, that they should understand what their digital footprint looks like. And, it was always a really difficult journey because you first had to tell them, you have this problem you don't even know about.
Yeah.
And then, did you know that there's now a product that you can buy that fixes this problem you didn't know you had? And I find that a lot of things in cybersecurity and a lot of things in technology in general kind of go like that, where you essentially, yes, it's a real problem. It absolutely is. You've picked up on a real problem, but the challenge is you've picked up on a problem that the market hasn't yet realized, and so you have to do a lot of education. And so that's one huge lesson that's always stuck with me is, man, is it easier, not to say you don't want to create your own category. CrowdStrike obviously very famously did that in the endpoint space,
Sure.
but they created a next generation category where they didn't have to convince people that security on the endpoint was a problem. So, like I say, literally hundreds of lessons that I've tried to take, both the good and the bad. But one of the most important for me, especially sharing with other potential founders and startup guys, of, take that empathetic understanding of your customer and your buyer and try to craft a solution or at least a message that resonates with something that they already understand, and especially try to figure out how your solution is going to align to their budget.
Sure.
Because especially in today's world, it's very rare that you're going to come in with a novel solution that isn't, either directly budgeted, or you've got to tell that story of, this is the budget area that's going to pay for this solution.
Got you. Some great learns there. You mentioned in there, and obviously we're a headhunting business, so I'm curious. You mentioned it's crowded. There's a high level of competition in the market. What have you learned in the times as a founder about hiring and about scaling a startup? Are there any lessons?
Oh yeah, man. I think talent is everything, to be honest. I think people are everything in this business. And to me, the most important part about people is ultimately culture.
Sure.
So I'm a big fan of a couple different things. One, we literally, down to the name of the company, believe that the 10xer is real. This idea originally comes from the term 10x developer, that, the idea was that the best people are literally an order of magnitude better at creative work, at work that requires the sort of this differentiated knowledge work. And I couldn't agree with that more. And so I think there's an incredible importance in finding the best people for the role.
Mhm.
There's an incredible importance too in having a great culture as a way to pull all those people together and get them swimming together in the same cadence at the same mission. Something I've always done at literally every one of my startups has been put together a culture deck.
Sure.
Famously the Netflix culture deck that sort of started, at least was the first example of this I ever saw. And, we've got a really great culture deck at Tenex that, again, builds on a lot of the lessons of previous startups of, these are the kind of people we want to hire. These are the kind of people we want to recruit. And my culture deck does, I think, just as much dissuading as it does convincing you to join. This is why you might want to work here, and this is why you might not want to work here.
Yeah.
This is what we're really like and what we're all about. And so, whether it's for a great recruiting firm like you guys or for a company that's thinking about this, I think that whole process is equally important. Be really transparent with the people you're looking to recruit or you're looking to hire. Be really transparent with your great recruiting partner to let them know this is what it looks like, to be excellent here at my company, and this is what good doesn't look like. And then the more clear you can be about that, and one of thousands of principles and lessons learned across the multiple startups across the career I've had, I believe really strongly in putting things in writing. The great John Turner, who was previously the CEO of Symantec and then was the chief revenue officer for Google Cloud Security for a while, he recently wrote a book that talks about this in part, but he came up, at least introduced it to me. Maybe it's not his own invention, but he came up with a concept of victory plans. It exposed me to this concept of victory plans. And I just believe so greatly in taking things, whether it's ideas, whether it's strategy, whether it's anything else, and putting it into writing.
Sure.
I believe really important, there's a lot of value and importance in that. And so, even down to, like you're saying, with recruiting, it's like, don't just have a job description, have a real clear explanation of this is what good looks like in this role, which I would ultimately lay out as culture. Ben Horowitz's great book, What You Do Is Who You Are, that, essentially one of the godfathers of startups and companies here is, the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz, basically has written two books both on incredible startup learnings, but it's very telling to me that the first was like a manual of how to be a great CEO, and the second was a manual of how important culture is. So really encourage people to really think about that, really focus on that, and especially manifest it into reality by putting it on paper, so that then you can share it with your great recruiting partner, you can share it with your candidates, you can share it with anybody to lay out, this is exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think setting expectations is completely just critical. Yeah, another great learn. Moving sort of back towards 10x and the way that you guys are using AI. AI just seems to be inevitable in SOCs. Why do you think that is?
Oh man, artificial intelligence is so interesting to me. The, Satya laid out recently that he believes this platform shift is greater in total technology impact than all previous platform shifts combined. And
Wow.
if you think about that, what he's saying is literally the move to personal computing, the move to the internet, the move to mobile, saying that artificial intelligence is going to have a bigger impact on the technology and infrastructure and landscape than all of those combined. It's really hard to argue with that. I think the reason, to directly answer your question, the reason everybody's immediately seen the applicability of artificial intelligence in the SOC is we've all, I think, so many of us had that wow moment with artificial intelligence playing with Chat GPT probably first, or whatever AI and LLM you were starting to play with. And you saw how this could immediately augment human intelligence and immediately reduce toil, making work that you were doing faster and better and more cost effective. And obviously in security operations, we've been doing this essentially the same way for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
It's been high drudgery, it's been high toil, it's been, very high stress, very high burnout. This concept of alert fatigue, I think it's a great term, but it doesn't even encapsulate what it's really like working in a SOC. I describe it, if you've never done it, it's literally like being under attack all day.
Right.
And it really, you can even measure this scientifically. It literally activates your fight, flight, freeze response and floods your system with cortisol, because you're literally dealing with attackers who are literally, it's obviously cyber attacks. It's not a physical attack, but guess what? Your body didn't evolve to understand the difference between cyber attacks and physical attacks. And so you're literally under attack all day, every day. And so, I think it's just very obvious for people when they saw, oh man, Chat GPT or, any LLM can really augment my ability as a human to gather information, to make decisions, to do all these things. It just was immediately obvious that one of the most painful areas in security, and the security operations side, could be absolutely transformed with artificial intelligence. And so,
Yeah.
I don't know if you were at RSA this year, but it was just hilarious to me. Literally every single company that I saw at RSA had plastered that they were the AI security experts, down to some of the most legacy companies in cybersecurity had, very big booths proclaiming their AI security expertise, when it's like, man, you guys have been responsible for more vulnerabilities this year than you have like actual security products. And, to try to lay yourself out as an AI expert is, quite frankly, very laughable. So, it's really interesting to me, because it's obvious to everybody the immediate applicability, but then, something we think at 10x, obviously, that's a huge differentiator for us, is actual practical experience in artificial intelligence. Most of us have been in the AI space for literally more than a year. I was at an AI endpoint company for a couple of years before this. And even before that, we were doing a very heavy amount of machine learning to, do detections and automations and security. And my CTO, for example, came out of the AI division of Google Cloud before coming out of the security division. So, the kind of people that really truly understand how to apply artificial intelligence, and our other big advantage, I feel, not just bolting this on. Like I say, you walk around RSA and everybody's saying, oh yeah, we're slapping AI into everything we're doing. It's like, yeah, are you really? Have you just added like a little chat pop that nobody actually wants to interact with? Or have you actually really retooled your product to take advantage of the incredible accelerative capabilities of artificial intelligence?
So you guys really feel that, AI being implemented in your products and your services from the inception of the company is an advantage. Why do you feel that?
Yeah, another great book I'd point people to, if you're not familiar, you absolutely should be, in the startup ecosystem. It's called The Innovator's Dilemma. Although I will say, like a lot of business books, you can basically get a 30-second summary and understand, 80% of the value of the book, but it's still a great book. You should absolutely dig into it. But it's this really interesting cycle that has been this way in effectively modern business, period. It's really interesting. This isn't just unique to technology companies, but technology companies just show this at a much more aggressive pace. And essentially, this proves it out even more. But it's ultimately, you build a business, you work really hard to build a product, build a service, train your people, all this other thing. And then some sort of innovation comes out. And to do it right, you should effectively change all of your things. You should change your process. You should change your technology. You might even need to change your people to take advantage of this new technology. And most people just won't or can't do that. And that's ultimately this innovator's dilemma. If you'd built a security operations center before the days of artificial intelligence, this is what I mean about built-in versus bolted on. If you just come in and go, well, yeah, we're going to start leveraging AI, so we're going to give the analysts another tab that they can pull up a chat GPT window and ask questions. Okay, that works a little bit. But somebody like us, we've literally been able to build in human reinforcement learning, data evaluation, data capture at every single layer of our platform. So just to give one concrete example, literally every action an analyst takes working for Tenex gets recorded in two different ways and feeds into the machine. And somebody who didn't build that capability, who's just trying to bolt it on, really doesn't have that same human in the loop reinforcement value that we believe gives us such a big advantage. So it's like anything else in business or technology. Innovations come along, and to be very blunt about it, the legacy companies just don't or can't adapt to the constant changes. And that's why we see the rise of CrowdStrike, where the legacy antivirus companies didn't react to, here's a better way to do things on the endpoint. And we believe ultimately it's going to be the same thing with us, with building out the next great cybersecurity services company. We believe we've got an offering that is better and faster and more cost effective than effectively everybody else out there. And when you offer people that kind of choice, it's just natural.
Should be a no-brainer. So, you guys talk about it as being like the next generation of MDR. It's obviously heavily AI driven. In terms of a SOC team, what is actually being automated? What is able to be automated?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question to dig into. Is artificial intelligence, and even is security, significant portions of security going to be able to be automated? And our fundamental philosophy here is not just human in the loop, but it's human-centric cybersecurity. So I believe, maybe a little bit controversially, but like I believe that so much of cybersecurity isn't going to be automated away. In fact, I believe as firmly as to say all of the people that are pursuing the AI SOC in a box, or they're pursuing whether it's a non-deterministic or deterministic approach to software automating your cybersecurity, I believe is ultimately a mistake. I believe that if you can make an automated decision about a threat, what you should actually be doing with that threat is shifting left in that, effectively, if you know that this alert is a false positive, you don't just need to automatically close that alert. You need to go change that. You need to go solve why that alert is being generated and move, shift left, move upstream effectively and change that.
Oh, yeah.
So we believe it's not about pure automation, although for sure automation is important. But the real way that we lay this out isn't, well, we're going to go automate away the tier one SOC analyst. And, to me, the tier one SOC analyst is just the first person that touches an alert. So even if you staff your SOC just with tier three people, guess what? Those tier three people are your tier one. It's like, Starbucks, you have a small, medium, and large. I don't care what you call it. Your smallest size is a small. So your first person that touches the ticket is your tier one, no matter what level of expertise they have. But, the long story short for us, what we've built at 10x is really using AI to augment human capability. And so, literally down to the name of the company, we think artificial intelligence can be a true order of magnitude improvement for how security people do their job. And in fact, we maybe should have named the company 100x, because if we hire 10xers and then we give them a 10x tool, we're actually talking about 2 orders of magnitude improvement of taking the best and brightest in security and giving them the kind of tools and automation that lets them move so much faster. So just to get, I like to be real specific with answers too, with these kind of conversations. So sure, can a lot of things, be identified as false positives and be automated away from alert fatigue perspective? Absolutely. But one of my big challenges to the industry is, use that as a learning to go, hey, look, here's a whole bunch of false positives that we want to go clean up and stop those alerts from coming in the first place.
Yeah, got you.
But then what we believe for sure can be automated is a lot of the analyst actions. And so a big part of what we're doing is really trying to achieve the vision that SOAR, that security orchestration automation response, originally laid out from a product perspective, which is like, if I need to take these 5 actions and these 5 systems to take a response to a security alert, you know what? AI is actually really good at that. You can, if you haven't played with the computer use models, you can basically have a set of instructions that you can generate from an analyst's workflow from a playbook and go, hey, do these 5 steps in this order in response to this event. And this is where we believe, we're still going to have a skilled human at the controls who's going to make that decision to fire that playbook or execute that automation. But, if the work behind it to quarantine this endpoint or to change a user's passwords or to, isolate a machine, whatever that looks like, being able to automate those response actions, I think, is really the most valuable part of building this next generation of managed detection and response.
Massively. And I think when you talk about fatigue there, that's clearly straight away you can see the impact it's going to have on that for SOC teams. So that's really cool. One question I did have actually was internally, how is AI affecting what you guys do at 10x? Are you utilizing it in any different ways apart from on the product?
Oh man, we are literally using it at every single layer of our business. And I encourage and give everybody all of these AI tools at literally every layer of the business. And when I say that, I mean that. So literally, my email is being read by an AI. My email is being, enhanced when it's written by an AI. All of my content, essentially any kind of written content that you ever see from anyone at 10x will have gone through a layer of artificial intelligence. It doesn't mean, Chat GPT is writing all of our emails, but it does mean, by default, we're using built-in artificial intelligence or third-party AI tools to do things like read and summarize email or to make real-time suggestions or make it faster to respond to email. We're using it very significantly on the business side. Contract reviews, contract summarization, document summarization, they're even building financial models, converting data, like essentially almost every aspect. And then another interesting point, we're actually using it, we're using several different AI enabled products and vendors because we believe in it so much. We're actually using one from a fellow Andreessen Horowitz portfolio company called 11x. Which we thought that was just too natural too, since we're 10x and they're 11x. But they're doing AI, essentially marketing and sales automation that we found a very good amount of value with. They've got a really sharp product to help automate kind of interacting with people from a both inbound and outbound perspective. If you think about like the sales cycle, it's traditionally very repeatable process of like a person asks for this kind of information in your support or on your website or in an email. Like that's something that's very easy to automate with artificial intelligence to go, hey, look, if somebody filled out this form and wants some more information, let's interact with them with, kind of some predefined scripts to help answer their questions and get them what they want faster.
Sure, that was going to be my next question, actually. Is AI impacting how you'll look to grow the team or scale the business?
Yeah, I mean, it literally it is at every single layer. I think it really is. AI to me really is the most impactful technology shift that we've ever seen. And I think the people that are able to take full advantage of it have such a tremendous advantage in this next cycle.
Sure.
So, there are a lot of different ways that we're leveraging AI to help us in and around human resources and recruiting, obviously down to the job descriptions, the org charts, all of that has had input from artificial intelligence. The culture deck that we created has been overworked by artificial intelligence. But, I haven't directly seen, like we haven't directly integrated artificial intelligence into like recruiting outreach or anything else like that, maybe that's something you guys can help us with. But what I have seen is the the general need to scale. Man, it's let us one do more with less. We're able to accomplish things at 10x. We maybe haven't achieved the true 10x multiplier yet, but I would realistically say, having built and scaled businesses before, especially having built and scaled MDR businesses before, we're probably doing 5 or 6 times the work at 5 or 6 times the velocity that we were at my previous company by measured by people. And so, that's translated into recruiting and headcount in kind of two different ways. One is it's let us really truly focus on hiring the absolute best people, and that's been a vision of mine, kind of from the beginning, is always trying to hire the true best and brightest. And we've really been able to focus on that with this impact of artificial intelligence. Because if you're really truly hiring somebody that you can make 10 times more effective, you're literally effectively hiring 10 people. And so the magnitude of finding the right hire and getting them in has maybe never been more important.
Sure.
The other side that AI has actually been helping us with, that you might not think about offhand, has actually been employee onboarding. So when somebody joins 10x, they've got tremendous amount of documentation, and they've got a tremendous internal knowledge base that they can go interact with in ways that previously wouldn't have existed. That's always been another sort of challenge of early stage startups, has been like, man, if you need documentation, you shouldn't join an early stage startup. You need to just jump in and figure it out. And it's like, actually, I think we've got better documentation. Again, going back to doing everything better and faster. I think we've got better documentation on a lot of things than what we did at previous companies, even at much more mature states, because of the ability of artificial intelligence to produce really great documentation, especially when you can feed it direct data or information for it to help generate.
Wow, I didn't think of that. That is really interesting. One question that I always ask on these podcasts, Eric, is, you've scaled lots of teams in startups. When you're looking to hire, are there any skills or traits that you consider as being absolutely non-negotiable in your startup teams?
There's a couple different things I would lay out. One, and I believe this was a Steve Jobs quote. I'm not going to get it right, but it's in our culture deck. If somebody wants to go find it, you can look for that, which is out on the internet. But
Sure.
The Steve Jobs quote that was basically, you can't ever convince someone who doesn't want to work hard to work hard. And that's really, I think, a very important part of culture, is finding people who want to have an impact.
Yeah.
We lay it out as a culture principle that effectively, like, if you want to be rewarded for excellence, if you want to put in hard work, and hard work doesn't mean long hours by default. It doesn't mean that at all. It means, do you want to achieve greatness? Do you want to do the hard work, usually meaning difficult work that is required to get to excellence? And, I very much believe in that, like selecting for people that are interested in solving hard problems and accomplishing great things and doing hard work. That's one of those traits that I believe you effectively can't really train somebody into desire.
Yeah.
Kind of understand that what you want to achieve is on the other side of these hard things. And if you go through those hard things, you're going to achieve what you want. The way out is through, effectively.
Yeah, you can't teach somebody to want to fight the good fight, right?
Exactly. So that's been a big one for me, for sure. The other thing that I lay out, I always like to lay out too, is I'm a huge fan of selecting for intelligence. And what does intelligence mean? The true definition of intelligence is problem solving capabilities.
Sure.
I'm not saying give all your employees an IQ test, but it's looking at the concept of, are you good at, do you enjoy solving problems? Do you like coming in and getting your hands dirty and fixing something, building something, solving something? Are you good at, and I think this is why a lot of those early tech companies had these very famous off the wall interview processes where they were asking like very random questions, how many iPhones can you fit in a 747 or whatever else. It's really about how you think. It's about, are you able to break down a problem and do so in a way that can actually get you, towards a solution. I believe that level of thinking and approach is really, really valuable.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Final question. If you could offer one piece of advice to yourself at the beginning of your career, what would it be?
Oh man, Tom, I love this question. It's a really, really good one to think about. So, one piece of advice at the very early part of my career, obviously I would go back and say something like buy Bitcoin or, but buy and hold an Nvidia stock. But let's scope it down to some actual practical business advice as opposed to stock tips. Um, the the message I would give my younger self, if I could, from a business perspective, would be just a slight different variation on something we already talked about, which is everything you want is on the other side of 100 hard things. I got that specific verbiage from Sahil Bloom, who wrote this really great book, uh, The Five Kinds of Wealth. And you might look at that title and go, wait, what? I'm not necessarily interested in like a traditional get rich book, and it's absolutely not. It's all about what are the real measures of wealth in your life. And this concept honestly probably took me too long to learn in life too. It is that concept of like, you have to put in the work, you have to do the hard things, and especially oftentimes it's the hardest of hard things,
Yeah.
to get to what you really want to accomplish. And early on in my career especially, I think you come at things and you don't understand or appreciate that you're going to have to put in that work, go through that pain, and come out the other side with what it is you want. And whether it's giving up too early when something is difficult, or not doing that thing that you hate, getting up early and getting to the gym, or whatever else it is, everything you want in life is essentially on the other side of 100 repetitions of a hard thing. And so if you put in the work, if you believe, if you stay focused on it, I think you can achieve greatness. And would love to have told myself that earlier on, and obviously love to share that with everybody here.
Yeah, I wish you could have gone and told me that at the beginning of my career as well, Eric. But there you go.
Well, and I think you're closing in on 100 episodes here, if I'm not
Absolutely, yeah,
mistaken. So, you're right at that peak of being on the other side of 100 repetitions of greatness.
absolutely. Well, Eric, we've come to the end, so I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for your insight. It's been awesome to have you.
Tom, truly a pleasure. Great connecting, and really big fan of the show. Thank you so much for having me.